Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. Today I will present my industrial relations case review based on the case Institute Integriti Malaysia versus ROZIAH binti Harun. This case is very important in Malaysian industrial relations because it discusses the issue of jurisdiction in the industrial court and whether Institute Integriti Malaysia, also known as IIM, is considered a government agency under Section 52 of the Industrial Relations Act 1967. The case also explains whether an employee can continue an unfair dismissal claim if the employer is connected to the government. Throughout this presentation, I will explain the facts of the case, the legal issues, the court judgment, the analysis and critique, and finally, the conclusion. Next, the first part of this presentation is the research objective. The objective of this case review is to study the industrial relations dispute involving Institute Integriti Malaysia and its former employee, ROZIAH Harun. Secondly, this presentation aims to understand the meaning and application of Section 52 of the Industrial Relations Act 1967. This section is important because it limits the industrial court's jurisdiction when the organisation involved is a government agency. Next, this presentation also analyses whether IIM should legally be considered a government agency even though it was registered as a company under the Companies Act. Besides, this presentation examines the legal reasoning used by the Court of Appeal and how the judges interpreted the law and evidence. Finally, this case review discusses the impact of this case on industrial relation practices in Malaysia, especially for organisations that are linked to the government. Before discussing the case itself, it is important to understand the legal background and literature related to industrial relations. Industrial relations refers to the relationship between employers, employees and trade unions. These three. The purpose of industrial relations law is to create fairness and harmony at the workplace. One important law in Malaysia is the Industrial Relations Act 1967 under Section 20, subsection 1. An employee who believes they are dismissed unfairly can make a presentation to the Industrial Relations Department. However, Section 52 of the Act states that the Industrial Court does not have jurisdiction over government servants or government agencies. Another important section is Section 29, subsection FA, which allows a party to apply to strike out a case if there are legal reasons why the court should not hear the case. In this case, jurisdiction became the most important legal issue because the court first needed to determine whether IIM was actually a government agency. Now, I will explain the facts of the case. The claimant, ROZIAH Harun, was an employee of Institute Integriti Malaysia or IIM. She was later dismissed from her employment because the company alleged that she committed misconduct. ROZIAH then claimed that she was dismissed without just cause of excuse. Therefore, she filed a representation under Section 20, subsection 1 of the Industrial Relations Act 1967. The Director General of Industrial Relations then referred the case to the Industrial Court for hearing. However, IIM objected to the case being heard in the Industrial Court. IIM argued that it was actually a government agency under the Prime Minister's Office or PMO. Because of this, IIM said that Section 52 of the Industrial Relations Act applied, meaning the Industrial Court had no jurisdiction to hear the case. IIM then applied under Section 29 subsection FA to strike out the case. The Industrial Court agreed with IIM and struck out the claimant's case. However, the High Court later disagreed and ordered the Industrial Court to hear the case again. Finally, the Court of Appeal reversed the High Court decision and confirmed that IIM was indeed a government agency. Next, there were several important legal issues in this case. The first issue was whether IIM should legally be considered a government agency. The second issue was whether Section 52 of the Industrial Relations Act removed the jurisdiction of the Industrial Court. The third issue was whether Section 29 subsection FA could be used to strike out the claimant's case before a full hearing. Another issue was whether IIM should first apply for judicial review to challenge the DJIRS decision before filing the strikeout application. And lastly, the court also needed to determine whether IIM employees should be considered public servants or private employees. Among all these issues, jurisdiction became the central issue of this industrial court had no jurisdiction. The case could not proceed further. The claimant argued that IIM should not be considered a government agency. First, she explained that IIM was registered under the Companies Act as a company limited by guarantee. Secondly, employees contributed to EPF instead of government pension schemes. The claimant also stated that IIM employees were not governed by the Public Officers Conduct and Discipline Regulations 1993. Instead, the organisation used its own internal employment rules and policies. The claimant further argued that IIM conducted commercial activities such as training and consultancy services, which made it appear similar to a private organisation. Because of these reasons, the claimant believed that the industrial court still had jurisdiction to hear her unfair dismissal claim. On the other hand, IIM argued strongly that it was connected to the government. The organisation received annual operational funding directly from the Prime Minister's office. The chairman of IIM was the chief secretary to the government, and other government officers were also involved in the board. IIM also worked closely with GIACC, which is responsible for national anti-corruption planning. Another important point was that any internal restructuring within IIM required approval from the Prime Minister's office. Most importantly, there was an official letter from the PMO in 2007 stating that IIM was a government agency under the Prime Minister's department. Because of these factors, IIM argued that Section 52 applied and the Industrial Court had no jurisdiction. Next, the Court of Appeal finally decided in favour of IIM. The judges held that IIM was indeed a government agency because of its close connection with the government and its public functions. The court explained that the real function and control of the organisation were more important than simply looking at its registration under company law. The court also confirmed that Section 52 of the Industrial Relations Act applied in this situation. Therefore, the Industrial Court did not have jurisdiction to hear the unfair dismissal claim. The Court of Appeal also ruled that the strike-out application under Section 29 subsection FA was proper and valid. As a result, the High Court decision was set aside and the Industrial Court's original award was reinstated. So, in my analysis, this judgment has both strengths and weaknesses. One strength is that the court clearly protected the jurisdictional boundaries under the Industrial Relations Act. The judges carefully studied the actual role and function of IIM instead of only looking at technical company registration. This decision also provides an important legal precedent for future industrial relations cases involving government-linked organizations. However, there are also criticisms. One concern is that employees working in organizations like IIM may lose protection under the industrial court, even though their working conditions are similar to private employees. Another criticism is that the distinction between government agencies and private organizations may still create confusion. Some organizations are registered as companies but remain heavily controlled by the government, making it difficult for employees to understand their legal position. In conclusion, the Court of Appeal confirmed that Institute Integriti Malaysia was a government agency under the Prime Minister's office. Because of this, Section 52 of the Industrial Relations Act applied, and the Industrial Court had no jurisdiction to hear the claimant's unfair dismissal case. The court focused on the actual control funding, public function and government involvement within IIM. This case is important because it helps clarify how Malaysian courts determine whether an organisation is truly a government agency. The case also serves as an important precedent for future industrial relations disputes involving government-linked organisations. Lastly, these are the references used in preparing this case review presentation. The sources include legal cases, Industrial Relations Act 1967 and legal materials from LexisNexis Malaysia. That's all from me. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.